Hey everybody, my name is John Fisher. I'm with AWS. I'm a senior security assurance consultant. I'm also have been assigned to the AWS Audit Manager team for the last 2.5 years. Happy to be here today, and I'm joined by quite a few of my colleagues here. Dheeraj Mehta, he is a senior product manager with the Artifact team, and I'm also joined by our premier sponsor, a premier partner, platinum sponsor. Did I get that backwards or I got it right? Okay. From Deloitte, we've got Shar Qureshi and we've got Lauren Goodchild. And we are going to be talking about let me get this to where it belongs. The compliance at cloud scale. How does AWS do it? So if you think about it, AWS has a massive amount of compliance obligations and a lot of services. A ton of evidence has to be collected. Automation has been built to do it. Dheeraj is going to address that. I myself am going to talk about how AWS Audit Manager, the service was built by externalizing these concepts, and we built a service that makes it easy for you customers that are innovating at the pace and scale of the cloud to get through your compliance obligations using that tool. I'll also quickly go through an example walkthrough of what evidence looks like previous to Audit Manager, what it looks like today. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lauren and Shar from Deloitte, and they're going to basically be the voice of the auditor. They're going to talk about how they've used these tools themselves and to enable their customers and to accelerate their audit journeys and reduce fatigue. With that said, I'm going to send it over to Dheeraj first.
Thank you so much, John. Hello, everyone. So my name is Dheeraj Mehta. I'm a product manager with AWS Security Assurance, and I'm going to talk about compliance at cloud scale. So let's take a polling question real quick. If you could take your cell phones out and scan this barcode to take this polling question, that'll be great. And we'll wait for a couple seconds. All right, let's take a look at the results. Okay, so most folks are in 1 to 10 range. So that sets us up for the next slide, and let's look at now compliance at cloud scale, right? So we are serving customers in 245 countries and territories. To do so, we have a lot of regulated customers from financial services, healthcare, government agencies. And to serve those customers, we go through thousands of global compliance requirements and we satisfy those requirements. So we have to go through certifications and attestations, laws and regulations, alignments and frameworks. That means we go through hundreds of audits every year. So to do so successfully, we really need to be very efficient and effective in our audit processes. So now let's take a step back and look at how a typical audit process could be. Well, a typical audit experience can be tedious, redundant, and time-consuming. An audit has like dozens of questions that are tied to like hundreds of document requests. Those are sent over to like several people from different business units. They chase down evidence, and all of that can be very time-consuming and take time away from our builders from innovating, right? Let's take an example. So privileged user access reviews. If we were to request for evidence of privileged user access reviews, then we'll need to first identify owners of all the applications that are in scope. We'll need to submit requests to all those owners. And then those application owners will need to look for evidence from like months or even a year old, those tickets to send back to the auditor. Sometimes there are some mistakes, and then the evidence is rejected, and then they have to come back for another cycle of evidence collection, right? So let's now talk about some key reasons why audits can be inefficient. Well, manual collection of evidence. when humans collect evidence, it takes time, right? We have to navigate through different screens, capture screenshots, store those evidences in their locations. We can make mistakes. There are incorrect or incomplete evidences that are collected, and then that that starts another cycle of evidence collection and resubmission to the auditors. If evidences are not tagged or categorized in the right way, there could be difficulty in searching for already collected evidences and reusing those evidences. And that means we will need to now collect the same evidence again. So that becomes an inefficient process. And then redaction. Many times these evidences are having a lot of sensitive information, and there is a need to redact that information before those evidences are provided to the auditors. So if redaction is done manually, that could slow us down as well. So let's talk about how did we gain efficiencies. So evidence and control mapping. We organized evidences with specific controls so that we can quickly use those evidences for our future needs. We invested in automating as much of evidence collection as possible. Of course, it may be difficult to automate every possible evidence, so we do what we can. At this point, we are able to gain efficiencies in reducing manual effort and the risk of human error. We are also we store that evidence in a immutable storage location with the digest file, and that helps us demonstrate that the evidence was not tampered with. At this stage, it is also important that, to understand that the system-generated evidence could be in different formats as compared to a manually pulled evidence. And we need to work with our auditors to make them understand that or demonstrate that the system-generated evidence is as good as a human collected evidence, and it should be accepted. Tagging and grouping of evidence. So that helps us a lot with reusing the same evidence for our future audits. And that can save us time, like grouping them with domains or any specific categories that work for us. And then automating redaction. So identifying any specific data elements that we would want to remove or redact out of our evidence files. That's also another opportunity where we have used automation. So these are some of the places where we gained efficiencies. Now let's take a quick look at what are the benefits that we are reaping out of these investments. So save time and effort, right? This saves time and effort for our builders because now they can focus on building and innovating for our customers. It also helps our auditors, our audit teams, and our compliance teams to support more audits at one time, right? Next is improving speed and accuracy. Now we can go back to our auditors faster. We can complete those requests faster and with more accurate information. Next is better reporting. So we are able to compile our compliance posture faster. We can aggregate it into a report that we can provide to our leadership. We can even flag our compliance risks faster. And then I think this is my favorite and the most important one. I think it helps us build employee morale because they don't have to do redundant work of going and fetching evidence from all the different applications. They can now focus on work that requires cognitive intelligence, and overall it helps with their job satisfaction, right? So with that, we have used all these learnings to also invest in a product that can help you gain efficiencies in your audit journey. And I'll hand over the control to my friend John, who will talk to you more about gaining efficiencies in your audit data collection process with Audit Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Duraj. I appreciate it. And I actually really love telling this story. And a lot of what Duraj talked about there is exactly what led to the construction of Audit Manager. And before we get going, I too am going to do a poll question because we're Amazon, we love data, and we're going to gather a little bit from you. So if you don't mind, take out your phones, snap that barcode. But what we're interested in learning is how much time does your organization spend collecting and organizing evidence per audit? A few hours a year, not that big of a deal. 40 to 60 hours a year, it's getting a little bit more painful. Most people probably finding themselves in the 61 to 100 hours a year space. Now we're starting to take away people that should be innovating or building or taking care of their regular job doing this sort of work. And beyond that, it gets pretty painful. So I'll wait a few seconds and let you guys get your results in there, and then we will take a look at them. All right, it looks like we've got some results piling in. Let us have a look. Okay. Actually, it is quite a bit. So you guys are feeling the pain of this situation. I can see that. And we will talk through how we can reduce that a little bit. So everybody probably remembers the world of on-premise audits. Things were really different there. You had static environments. They didn't change all that much. Maybe they did towards the end of all that when you started to see virtualized environments come to place. You had things coming and going. But in the cloud, it's much different, right? Wireless networks to consider, unused assets that were stashed in the closet or the back rooms, physical assets, figuring out where the data was, identifying the scope, and what can actually affect security. So monolithic architectures was another thing that's quite different from today. And I have to tell you, full disclosure, I am a PCI QSA, but don't worry, I'm not here to audit your cardholder data environment or anything like that. But with that said, cloud audits bring a different perspective. And in some ways, they can be more difficult even than on-premise audits. You're probably surprised to hear me say that, working for AWS. But the reason why is you've got this thing called shared responsibility, which I know has been beat into y'all's head for years. And shared responsibility varies from, and the line is drawn in different places depending on the types of AWS services you're using. And the environments and the applications are really dynamic, right? Your servers can be here today, gone tomorrow. So if you were to send somebody out to collect screenshots, by the time they were organized, collated, handed over to somebody like Deloitte for analysis, those servers or those instances may not even still be alive in the environment and frankly would be irrelevant for the audit at that point. And today in the cloud, most things are connected via microservices and APIs or containers. Data segmentation is generally account driven. Data access controls are something to consider. And then the security controls that the cloud service provider AWS has. And a lot of that can be picked up from inheriting and relying on AWS's security controls for physical aspects of our data center and other things, and that is something that the AWS Artifact takes care of. Okay. Moving from there, how does Audit Manager actually work? And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. But Audit Manager collects evidence in 4 different ways. And at the top there on the left, AWS Config and AWS Security Hub are actually used to perform automated testing of your resources. So when you think about it, your cloud environment's got potentially thousands or tens of thousands of resources across many accounts. There can be hundreds of accounts. And it's going to be impossible for any auditor to come along, screenshot any of that, or check all of that, or even do analysis on all of that. So Config and Security Hub are constantly taking tests from rule sets that are aligned to your framework controls of those resources and presenting whether or not they are compliant with those rules. And that evidence comes into Audit Manager and is organized to whatever framework or frameworks or your own custom controls that you got to comply with. The next one down is external evidence. So there's always going to be these things like security awareness training. Everybody's got to take that. And it can be done anywhere. It's generally done through a third-party service or whatever, but you got to prove that your folks in IT have passed these usually simple exams that they can pass with their eyes closed, but that they've done it and that these certificates are on hand. That's not something that we automate, so we allow you to upload that stuff to Audit Manager either via the console or via API. The third one down is user activity log. So I want you to think of it like this. Let's say we've got and this is kind of the pinnacle of continuous compliance. Let's say we've got a RDS table and we've got a policy in place that says that all tables must be encrypted because they contain sensitive data, cardholder data or healthcare data or whatever it may be, okay? And let's say somebody came along and disabled the encryption in that table. Audit Manager would pick that up via one of the automated tests. CloudTrail would send the activity record to Audit Manager saying who did it, okay? And maybe they're going to be in trouble, maybe they're not. It could be an accident, right? And then the perfection in continuous compliance would be if you had something that triggered a repair and actually re-encrypted the table, right? And you could do that through Systems Manager automation documents or Lambda functions, actually any number of ways. Or you can use the Audit Manager dashboard. If you've got a second-line defender monitoring this, they will see that it's come out of compliance, and they can call down to the first-line guy that's responsible for that control, tell them to re-encrypt that table, right? And then all those records are going to repeat back into Audit Manager. You're now going to see that the table is encrypted, we're back in compliance, and you'll see who did it. Most likely, hopefully it would be the system. When you give that evidence to the auditor, they're going to see that not only is things back in compliance, but they're going to see that your organization actively manage your compliance. And that really is the pinnacle of continuous compliance. The last part down there is S2S, which in the world of AWS stands for Service to Service API calls. So I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with the whole song and dance of chasing down screenshots. This is sort of the same thing. We chase down the configurations of your resources and get the API calls around those and be able to detail what the properties and settings are of each of these resources, hand that over to folks like Lauren and Shar to analyze, and I don't think they actually do it, but their teams do it, and make a determination if things are actually in compliance or not. So those would be things that third line folks would be interested in. But some of the ways that we externalized what you heard Duraj talking about were these 4 items right here. When they went to automate things for AWS to keep up with the extent of the audit requirements that we go through, these 4 things kind of popped up, right? Immutable storage. Auditors are not going to accept something that they're not positive has not been altered from the time it got there from a machine-generated situation, right? So immutable storage. Our service, Audit Manager, is in control of the storage. Verifiable provenance. It's not very useful to the auditors if they cannot determine that it has not been altered. So what we do at Audit Manager is we provide for each piece of evidence collected, whether it's 1 or 50,000, and it's going to be somewhere way greater than 1 and hopefully less than 50,000 in an audit cycle, but it can be way more. It just depends on how big your environment is. We generate a digest file that has for each row a SHA-384 hash value for each piece of evidence. Your auditor can probably not going to go through all of them, but they will do a sample and be sure that nothing has changed from the evidence as we captured it, gave it to them in a report, and what's actually in that digest file to prove it. And then, of course, as I mentioned, automated testing and then evidence mapped to framework control. So let's go through each one of these individually. So immutable storage resides in storage under the services control. However, encryption is managed by the customers, and the evidence cannot be modified. It can only be deleted when an assessment is terminated or after the retention period is over. Verifiable provenance, I just explained it. Basically, every row in the digest file has a SHA-384 hash value. Auditors can take a hash of a particular piece of evidence, compare it to that row in the hash file, and they will know that nothing has changed. Automated testing, basically Config and Security Hub has, I believe Config is up to more than 300 rules. I'm really not sure how many checks Security Hub has these days, but we use these things mapped to framework controls to automatically test the resources. Now, this is extremely useful for second line defenders, right? They'll be able to tell from a machine-generated perspective, what's passing, what is failing, right? Third line defenders will be interested in this as well once they can verify that the data coming out of the system is in fact accurate. They will come to rely on that more, and Shar and Lauren are going to speak to that here in a few minutes. All right. Automated testing, reports wind up looking something like this. Now, obviously, this particular one shows everything out of compliance. I took this from my own AWS account, which is sandboxed, I promise you, from a security perspective. But yes, I run a lot of things out of compliance just so I can generate evidence and have a look at it. And then this is what our dashboard looks like. And this is something your second line defense folks are going to be interested in. So you can have multiple assessments going across many different types of frameworks, PCI, NIST 853, FedRAMP, HIPAA, whatever it may be. And we've devised a mechanism to roll all those controls into a set of common domains, and we can report on them whether or not they are in compliance or out of compliance. So you second line defenders can check this every day, probably multiple times a day, see where you got issues, and actually download those issues and send them down to the first line defenders to get them corrected. All right. And then evidence map to framework controls. If we did not offer this, we've got nothing to offer you, right? So if as you well know, PCI's got 12 requirements, but it actually has more than 200 controls and actually more than 600 testing procedures, right? The evidence that comes in from Audit Manager is mapped at the control level. So you're not having to take all this information, all these screenshots that you went and sent emails to so-and-so to collect and organize those to hand over to your auditor. Your auditor can actually come into Audit Manager and use a new feature that we released called Evidence Finder and get to what they need today. So when I was doing PCI audits, I would obviously I couldn't cover everything in one day. So if today I'm covering something like requirement 4 around encryption in transit, I could go to Audit Manager's Evidence Finder and just give me the stuff for requirement 4, or even go at a lower level than that, get to a specific control, a specific account, whatever the case may be. So that's how that works. And then here's some example of our supported frameworks. And while you're looking at this lovely shot on the screen, I want to mention that another use case that we have been seeing a lot of traction with is you can build your own custom framework from any one of these or from the ground up, and you can share it. So let's say, some of you guys probably know, you also have to manage the compliance of your own vendors, your third parties. And doing so traditionally has not been a whole lot of fun. Spreadsheet, questionnaires, hope they're telling the truth, maybe get a little bit of evidence back from them. With Audit Manager, you can build a framework that will assess those third parties, and you can share it directly with them out of the console or via the API. They will pick that assessment up and run it in their account and can provide you hard evidence. And I believe yesterday we released an add-on feature to that where you can include your qualitative assessment, your questionnaires, as part of your assessment framework. So it's pretty cool. So quick example. I know you probably figured I was going to do a PCI example being a QSA, and frankly I was, because it's the only one I'm that good at. Requirement 121C from PCI 321 requires that we examine the firewall and router configurations to verify that inbound and outbound traffic is specifically denied. What we're looking for is at the very bottom of your firewall rules, we're looking to see that it says all is denied. So if there's not an explicit from this IP address to this IP address, allow port 443, we want to make sure that everything is explicitly authorized at the very bottom. If it's not explicitly authorized, it is just denied, okay? So on-premise considerations, firewalls, routers, switches, how things are configured from a WAN LAN perspective. Cloud considerations, there's more than I've listed here, but generally speaking, security groups and network access control lists are sort of the equivalent of those things. On-premise, you remember these things, screenshots from things like Palo Alto and Cisco firewalls and from Windows host-based firewalls. You hand these over to your auditors, and trust me, as a PCI QSA, I really hated examining these things. I spent hours looking at this stuff, and nothing was worse when something would slip through the cracks, but it will happen, all right? Audit Manager evidence looks a lot like this. It's not that much different, but you can get the hard evidence like this that shows, actual rules from port 443 to 443 for a specific IP range. But you can also get the evidence in the automated testing format to verify that no insecure things exist between the internet and your AWS resources. So you can use this type of evidence to verify that things are in place. You can use the broader compliant, non-compliant, automated testing evidence to look at the entire population. You're not just zeroing in on a sample of things and hoping that that sample that got selected is in fact, secure. So that's that. So wrapping up of the cloud, like Daraj said, the scale of not only what we have to protect and what we have to report on here at AWS, it absolutely requires automation. There's no way their team, even if it was 50 times the size that it actually is, could keep up with all of their audit requirements if it was not that way. And frankly, this is what's enabled the innovation of the cloud. It's enabled us to build this more than 268 services that we provide to all you guys to build on. And Audit Manager basically externalized this automation to help customers with their in the cloud audits, okay? So wrapping up in the cloud, immutable storage of evidence, verifiable provenance, the evidence already pre-mapped to the frameworks, collect once, report many. This is a big one. Most of you guys have more than one compliance obligation. Being able to collect your evidence once and have it map outward to the things that you have to be reporting on is going to save you a lot of time. And then my favorite, real time, not point in time, okay? And at the end of the day, like Daraj said, preserve your cognitive intelligence for innovation for your workloads in the cloud. Do not waste it on things like chasing down screenshots. Thank you. And I'm going to turn this one over to Lauren. There you go.
Thank you. Thanks, John. So, hi everyone. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Lauren Goodchild, and I'm a senior consultant in our cloud risk and digital controls practice at Deloitte. So I think we'll kick off, actually. So what we're going to focus on is we've heard about of the cloud, we've heard about in the cloud, and who's actually auditing in the cloud. You can hear from the villains themselves who are asking you to do all these things and get everything for us. And you can hear a little bit more about from our perspective and where we see the industry going in terms of cloud and all the technology that's coming through. So first, we have a few polling questions. So if you take a second to get out your phone and snap the QR code. So first polling question, really no wrong answer for this one. Which persona most closely matches your organization when it comes to your automation of evidence collection? Are you a spectator? Are you an explorer, an innovator, or a visionary? So I'll give a few seconds for everyone to answer the question. So I can give a bit of background of each one. A spectator, you're still extracting evidence manually. If you're an explorer, you're thinking about how you can do this a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. An innovator, you're on the right path and you're proactively making moves to automate your evidence collection, or you're a visionary. You want to automate everything. So I think we can see the results. All right, so we have a pretty good split. We have a lot of explorers and we have a lot of innovators. All right, I think we got one more polling question for you. All right, so which tools are you utilizing to drive automation in your environment? Are you using AWS Audit Manager, using infrastructure as code or policy as code, using a third-party SaaS solution, or maybe you're still doing a homegrown application, you're developing everything in-house? So give a few seconds to answer the poll. All right, the results are in. So we can view the results. All right, so we have a lot of folks using infrastructure as code or policy as code in a third-party SaaS solution. We actually talked about this polling question this morning and what we thought everyone was going to pick, and we said there was going to be split between those two, so at least it's consistent. All right, so we can move on back to the presentation. and we can get started. So like I said, I work for Deloitte, and at Deloitte we do a lot of audits. I'm sure you've heard maybe you've been involved in a SOX audit, a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, or even an internal audit where the scope can be really anything you define it to be. So if you think about audits, and one thing they all involve, at least today, is technology. But that's not how it used to be. So if you think 20, 30 years back, audits were primarily manual. They were, a lot of them, financially focused, and it was based on records and books. So, and the folks that were doing them were mostly your accounting folks, and there was a lot of tick and tie, and you have a lot of documentation, a pretty manual effort. However, and then as technology became more embedded into businesses, and businesses were able to use them for processes and to make their lives a little bit easier, technology became introduced in the world of audit. What do we do with this? So that's where you found a little bit of a newer job market, like for what Char and I do, and you're able to be a technology controls specialist, and you're evaluating the systems that process the data and store data for companies. And as all this technology is evolving and it's making businesses easier, it's making their processes easier, you'd imagine that audits got easier too, right? They got more efficient, they were able to be automated, but really a lot of it wasn't. A lot of it was still a pretty large manual effort. The extractions were still manual, and there's a few reasons for these challenges. One is that at the time, a lot of the technology stack had a pretty common architecture. It lent itself to a check-the-box approach, and it was a pretty manual effort. So you're manually extracting, you're taking a lot of screenshots. If anyone here is an auditor or you support audits, I'm sure you've been in the limbo and the dance of taking a screenshot, oh, I didn't get a date on it, or taking a screenshot, I didn't get the whole screen. So you can attest to the manual effort of all of this. And it becomes, a real point of fatigue, for auditors too. We don't want to make you take screenshots over and over again, as much as you don't really want to take them. But that was then, and this is now. So what we're seeing now with a lot of our clients is that organizations are migrating a lot of their workloads over to the cloud, and they're relying on this new technology to drive change, innovate, become a more efficient, and be a more agile organization. But where does that leave the auditor? I was just talking about how auditors were relying on this check-the-box approach. They could kind of do everything with a similar system. A database is a database, and so on. But cloud, I can tell you with all the clients that I've served, no two environments are the same in AWS. So what do you do then? And you have to really understand the technology, and you really have to understand how it all works. But like any other problem, the market offers a solution. So one solution that we've seen is AWS Audit Manager for auditors to rely on evidence and be able to gain comfort that all of their risks that they're auditing over are being addressed. And I won't go into much deeper with AWS Audit Manager. I'll let Shar do that in a few minutes. But if we move on and say you're one of these organizations that is moving to the cloud, you're thinking about it, what should you be asking yourself as an auditor? So one of the things that you should consider is track your changes. So if you think, a few years back, and then now if your organization or your client is moving to the cloud, what is changing with my techniques and my methodologies? Is there any way that I can do this better? Another thing is to consider is your full IT landscape. Back when everybody had everything on-prem, it was pretty easy to count your ducks and make sure you had them all in a row. However, with this, or with cloud and all of the new cloud platforms, you have to consider platforms. You have to consider if you have a mix of IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, which a lot of organizations do, and consider if you still have homegrown applications and how they fit into your whole mix. And then finally, understand if your clients or any stakeholders of your organization are using any third-party tools for evidence collection, and understand if you can rely on it and if it does exactly what you need it to. So, in the spirit of evidence collection, I'm going to turn it over to Shar to talk more about automated evidence collection.
Thanks, Lauren. My name is Shar Qureshi. I am a senior manager in Deloitte's Digital Controls Cloud Risk Practice. For organizations that are moving and migrating and taking a path to automation, one thing is clear, that it's not just one thing that you're going to do. It's actually a lot of things. So it may be, as we saw in the polling question, you could be doing infrastructure as code, your compliance as code. It could be the tooling that you're using. It could be a continuous monitoring program that you have in place. There's a lot of things that you're going to do cross-functionally throughout the organization. One thing is clear, though, is that AWS Audit Manager is an integral part of that path towards automation. Now, John spoke about some of the features on AWS Audit Manager. What I wanted to do is also cover some features, but really speak to it from the lens of an auditor. What we're seeing in terms of how customers are using it, and then how the auditor itself is benefiting us. Assessment objective and scope. So you have the ability to select the accounts that you want, as well as there will be applications that reside in those AWS accounts, and really drill in and hone in on the services that are supporting that application that may be in scope for SOCs, it may be in scope for a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, or may be relevant to you for a compliance requirement. So if you have an ECS workload, you have an RDS database, you have S3 buckets, you can select those from a drop-down menu and really fine-tune what you want to look at. How does that benefit the auditor? You can push away the noise. So oftentimes when you have an assessment, you're using a tool, it's doing an assessment, it's going to capture everything. You need to filter away that noise. So now I can really focus in on what's important for me for my compliance requirement. If I look at the pre-built and custom controls John mentioned and spoke about, you're using a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, they're standard controls, but if your organization is very customized, the controls are very specific, you can create customized controls and add them on to your pre-built controls and have a full framework. The evidence collection, this thing, the piece that that was mentioned, evidence collection, evidence finder, this is a differentiator. Every tool that I've seen out there has focused just on point in time. I want to see what's in my estate now. But you don't get the evidence collection. And I think we beat it over the head. Evidence collection is manual, it's tedious, it's time consuming, it is a drain. But when we have a service that's pulling that evidence for you, one, the control owners, the process owners, the people that you may be working with, the system engineers, the developers, it's a relief for them because now they're not spending time going through the environment trying to figure out what you're looking for. It's right there in Evidence Finder. This is really something that I just found as an auditor truly beneficial. And then control analysis and assessment reporting. So you want to see what are the findings that were identified from running the assessment report in AWS Audit Manager. So you run the report, and then you can see all the controls that were evaluated for the services that were evaluated, the accounts that were evaluated, and being able to tie back where were the control breakdown, where was the control failure, and then you can drill further. I want to see that evidence, what really went wrong. And we did this for a few clients as a proof of concept to get them comfortable with automation as they were going on that digital transformation, that digital journey, going from this path or forging down this path to automation. It didn't stop there. We were using AWS Audit Manager, and the client came back and said, we want to extend the capabilities of Audit Manager. What do you want to do? And they came back to us and they started to explain, well, we have AWS native services, but we also have other tooling from other providers in our account. Can that be assessed? Can our control environment be assessed for this? And we used Deloitte's Nexus Cortex platform to ingest the APIs that are coming in from Audit Manager to extend that capability. We also were asked, we want to establish continuous audit and compliance, right? Our continuous compliance program. So we started there just to ingest a lot of material and transform and digitize the risk assessment process to really focus in on high priority risks and tie them back to the controls. And that gave us an opportunity to identify when there will be a control breakdown in near real time, trying to really get into that continuous monitoring piece. Evidence collection. Now that we're ingesting and evaluating evidence from numerous sources, from JSON, JSON output, YAML files, CSV, text, we were getting a lot of information. That gave us an opportunity to do two things, which the client had also was on their checklist. One was predictive analytics. Now, instead of sample sizing, the way that we've traditionally done in the audit space, we're able to evaluate full populations. We're able to see what's in our entire environment. Sometimes that's a bad thing. But in this case, it really gave us an opportunity to identify where could a potential breakdown occur. In addition to that, it also gave us the opportunity to really hone in on what is the root cause for a particular control breakdown and a control failure. So now we can understand why there is a failure in one organization within the company versus another, and really hone in on that. The last piece was assessment reporting. So to extend the capabilities of Audit Manager, we started to create persona-based dashboarding. So this, you had different individuals within the organization. They wanted to look to see how they're controlling, where are the failures, where are the issues that I need to really be concerned about, what are the risks that I really need to focus in on. So we created dashboards that were specifically curated for the CISO, specifically curated for a developer, specifically curated for security engineering or security architecture, risk, and audit. In addition to that, the ask was, could you also integrate this into our GRC platform? So Open Pages, Archer. We want to be able to track these control breakdowns and to appropriately triage and treat a finding as it's identified. So this gave us an opportunity, or gave them the opportunity, hey, we have a finding, now it's tracked, and now we have a program in place to appropriately do a risk assessment, to do an impact analysis, to do an exposure analysis. And it was integrated so then they can keep track as findings are identified in near real time. The last part is really just the future and forward outlook. If you're going down the path of automation, how to identify, how to get started, what you should start to think about as you're going down this path, thinking about automation. There's a lot of things that you're going to do. Using cloud is going to give you that access and the ability for establishing a continuous compliance program with that mindset. I want to be able to start thinking about my environment now and going forward, and how to take a preventative measure instead of your traditional audit approach of let me look at things from the past. Technology is going to continue to evolve. Organizations are going to deploy automated solutions, and the last part really here is just is the need to upskill and make the practice, the profession in audit really be cloud conversant, conversational with engineering, with development, to make an impact when you're having those conversations during an audit. So AWS Cloud Audit Academy is an opportunity to do that, and we've been working with AWS to really help develop the practitioners to get familiar, to understand how to navigate a cloud environment, how to really just pop open the hood, pull back the curtain, ask the right questions, and move away from that check the box approach based on, we see the number of services, the number of features that are introduced. How does an auditor keep up? The AWS Cloud Audit Academy is an opportunity to really hone in on that skill set and really develop that core competency in cloud. All right, with that, I can pass this back to Dheeraj.
All right. Thank you, Shar. So, I think, yeah, we'll just. All right. So, I think we are going to have I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. So, on behalf of you, we'll discuss a few questions. So, John, I'd like to ask you, how can our customers get started with using Audit Manager to optimize their audit workflows?
Yep, that's a good question. So basically, there's a couple of things that you need to think about, right? Chances are each of you guys have got more than one thing that you got to comply with, right? So doing sort of an analysis of your environment, what it is you got to comply with, consolidating your controls into something that's more aligned, one control that can map outward to the many things you got to comply with, right? And then develop that. And then as far as setting up Audit Manager and Config and Security Hub and the other tools, and by the way, those aren't prerequisites to using Audit Manager, but they will make the experience better. That part's actually pretty easy, and I am more than happy to offer up my time to anybody that wants to have a personal one-on-one walkthrough with Audit Manager and the capabilities that it has. Reach out to me when I walk off here, and I'll let you take a picture of my card. I've given out almost all of them, and then we can connect week after next or so, and I can give you a walkthrough on that. But basically, it's simple. Figure out where your automation opportunities are. Figure out what a minimal set of controls are. Therefore, you can define sort of a proof of concept. Then we can help you get the service enabled, which is literally 5 or 10 minutes worth of work. Figure out where the data is, figure out where the accounts are, that kind of stuff that an auditor would want to know to get your scope properly defined, and then you can get things rolling. So I hope that answers the question. But I do have one question for you, Dhiraj. I'm still... When I took the job here at AWS, I was absolutely mortified by the thought of how much that they have to keep up with. I don't know the exact number of compliance obligations. It's way more than 100. And we all know the number of services. And if you guys are running thousands of resources in your account, we're managing all of them. What are some of the challenges that security assurance came into when you guys were building out automation of the cloud?
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks. So, like I mentioned before, when we invested in automating evidences, we came across a challenge. One of the big ones was auditors would not accept those system-generated evidences. Those were in different formats. Those were XML files, JSON files, and they were used to looking at screenshots. So there was a learning curve there, and there was some back and forth, some interaction to make them believe that or demonstrate that these evidences, system-generated evidences, are basically have them validate and verify that they were collected properly and they were not tampered with. So with that, I'd like to have Shar provide the auditor perspective of what expectations Deloitte puts on the auditors when they are looking at system-generated evidences.
So when you're looking at system-generated evidence that comes specifically from a tool, we have guidance that we use. One, to use the tool itself. So we'd have to look at controls around who has privileged access, who has the ability to make modifications to the tool itself. Then we also have, looking at change management of the tool. We need to get comfortable with the controls around the tool itself. But then we also have controls around how do we get comfortable with the evidence that that tool is performing or providing. So we look at AWS Audit Manager. So do we understand what's the query that's being used? Did we look at any filters that are being used to extract or exclude information or data from our reports, from our data that we're using? Maybe there's parameters that we need to look at and focus in on. Maybe there's a report logic that we need to look underneath to see how that code is working. And I'm not a developer, I don't write code, but I'd sit with the developer to understand how is that code being generated to produce the report that I'm relying on from an audit perspective.
I got one more for you, Shar. When it comes to automated testing, the system deciding if a resource is compliant or not compliant, how does Deloitte approach the analysis of that type of evidence? Is that something y'all accept? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So from an automated control perspective, we'd have to look at how this automated control is working. Is this automated control something that was provided by the vendor? Or do I have some ability to make some configurations for that automated control? Then there's also looking to see how that automated control works in the environment. So does it process transactions consistently for every single type of transaction? If it varies, maybe for a certain percentage, it calculates X, or for a certain percentage, it calculates Y. We'd have to understand and look at the logic to see what's being done here. So oftentimes we think of automated control, I'm just going to test once, pencils down, I can move on. But really you have to spend time understanding how that automated control is working, and some of the variance or some of the discrepancies, how that automated control is actually operating and being used.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Diraj. Thank you, Lauren. Again, if you guys want to talk to any one of us, we'll be down here. Really, really appreciate y'all's time. So long.